You're listening to Stateside. I'm Cynthia Canty. There are now only 11 of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen still alive, men who flew combat missions in World War II. And retired Lieutenant Colonel Harry T. Stewart, Jr. is one of those last men standing. The Bloomfield Hills man turned 95 this summer. His life is the subject of a book published this summer, co-authored by aviation writer Philip Handleman. It's called Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's first-hand account of World War II. I spoke with Colonel Stewart earlier this year to talk about his life and his service. Colonel Stewart, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Stateside.
It's a pleasure being here.
So you flew 43 combat missions, awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, a Congressional Gold Medal for your valor with the 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails. Going back earlier, what are your first memories of seeing aircraft and being called to fly them?
Well, my parents told me, I was born in Newport News, Virginia, and we lived not too far from a Army airfield in Newport News by the name of Langley Field. My parents used to put me out in the crib in the daytime to sun me, and they told me that when the planes would fly over, I would look up and Google at the planes and coo along, that type of thing, and like I wanted to be up there with the pilots. And around 2 years old, my parents, we all moved the family to Queens in New York, about a mile and a half from an airport by the name of North Beach Airport. That today is now LaGuardia Airport. But I used to go over as a teenager and sit near the airport and just watch the planes fly and fantasize that I was up there with them in the cockpit flying the plane along. So I think that was my initiation, or those were my initiations in wanting to become a pilot.
And, of course, the chances of an African-American being able to fly were pretty limited until the door opened with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And then earlier that year, the Army decided it would train, and I'm going to use the parlance of the day, an all-Negro flying unit. And we should remember, in World War I, the Army had refused to even consider allowing blacks to even be aerial observers. But they opened that door, and you volunteered for the Army Air Corps on your 18th birthday. But I read in the book, as a little boy, you'd had polio and a heart murmur. How'd you clear that physical?
Well, I sort of hid them from discovery by the doctors there. I know that when I went in to take my physical, as far as my leg was concerned, my right leg, which had a slight paralysis in the calf muscle, and I had no Achilles reflex. And when the doctor went to hit the Achilles tendon with his mallet there, I almost kicked the mallet out of his hand. So he assumed that everything must have been all right as far as my leg was concerned. As far as the heart was concerned, I was within a line of inductees at the time there, and they had a couple of doctors who were just walking along, listening to the hearts of the future soldiers that stood there. And the one that came to my heart, he listened, and he took some time to listen again, and then he called the other doctor over and he said, "Say, listen to this." And the other doctor came over and listened, and he said, "It's all right." And that was it.
So you pass the physical, you leave Queens for basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi, and then flight training in Tuskegee, Alabama. And as we see in this book, Soaring to Glory, what a change for a man of color who'd grown up in Queens. Tell us about those first times when you came up against Jim Crow. What happened, and how did you choose to react?
Well, the first time was when I got on the Penn Station, New York, to go down to, pardon me, Biloxi, Mississippi. And when we got to Washington, the conductor came into the car that I was in, and I happened to be with some kids from my neighborhood at the time. They were white, and the conductor pointed to me and he said, "You go up to the Jim Crow car in the front." So my parents had warned me about this and told me that there was institutional segregation in the South, and that when I passed the Mason-Dixon line that runs through Washington there, that I would be relegated to question of integration and segregation, I should say. But anyway, the fellows that were with me, they said, well, Harry, we'll go up front with you. And the conductor says, no, no, you don't. He said, that's the car for the Negro people. And I didn't make an argument. I just went up front. But I think in incidents like that and further incidents that were to come along, I just kept my eye on the prize, and the prize being getting my wings as a Air Corps pilot. And that was about it.
You stayed focused, and it was very stunning to read about your there was your first flight in an open cockpit. You were in that PT-19 trainer, and flying over Alabama fields where your grandfather had been born into slavery.
Yes, he was born in 1863, and it was quite a sensation to be flying up over near Montgomery, Alabama, where he was born. And that was my first solo and my first introduction to flight. I had never been up in a aircraft before, and it was quite an experience.
The book makes it very, very clear, Colonel Stewart. Training was tough. Your class started with 75 cadets. Only 26 made it to the end, but on June 27th, 1944, you were commissioned a second lieutenant in the Army Air Forces. You were 19 years old, and you didn't even have a driver's license.
Being from New York, you really didn't need a car. The family didn't have a car, so I didn't know how to drive.
But you were a flyer, and they sent you to Italy to be deployed with the now legendary 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails. Colonel Stewart, if you could, would you just listen for a moment? And I want you to tell me if this tune rings a bell for you.
All right.
Tell me why you keep fooling, little coquette, making fun of the ones who love you, breaking.
Do you recognize that song?
I do. You're bringing tears to my eyes. And anyway, Little Coquette, and that was Guy Lombardo, I believe.
It was.
Playing that rendition of it. There was one other orchestra played a rendition of it also. It was Duke Ellington.
Yes.
But
why is that song special to you?
I just loved it. That's all. I loved the tune, and I don't know. There was something about the tune that I liked. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, so when it came to putting the nose art on my aircraft there, I decided to go ahead and have them put Little Coquette as the nose art, and that was it. That's what I had on my aircraft.
Your brand new P-51D Mustang. And if you've just joined us, I am speaking with one of the last surviving members of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, Jr. Aviation writer Philip Handleman's latest book, Soaring to Glory, tells us the story of Colonel Stewart's life. Sir, I've known a number of B-17 flyboys through my time volunteering for honor flights. Some were POWs, and to a man, they said, if you found yourself on the ground in German territory, you wanted to find German soldiers because civilians were much more dangerous to a downed American flyer. And you lost a friend that way, didn't you?
Yes, we did. It was April 1st of 1945. Incidentally, that happened to be Easter Sunday and also April Fool's Day. But we had just completed escorting bombers up into Austria. And the bombers were started heading back home, and a contingent of the escort that I was in there, a contingent of 7 planes, were ordered to perform a fighter sweep in the area. This was around the Danube and Linz, Austria, Wels, Austria, and not too far from Vienna. But anyway, fighter sweep was to destroy any rolling stock that we saw on the ground, river, barges, and enemy aircraft, if possible. And this was all to make it more difficult or bring the war to a speedy conclusion. Anyway, to make a long story short, we were attacked by a large group of German aircraft. They were fighter planes, FW-190Ds. Three of the seven of us, got shot down. One managed to take his crippled plane to friendly territory in Yugoslavia. The second, he was instantly killed when he was shot down. The third, his name was Walter Manning. He was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was able to bail out of his aircraft, but as soon as he alighted in his parachute, he was captured by a mob and delivered to the local jailhouse in Linz, Austria there. About 2 nights later, in fact, exactly 2 nights later, another mob formed and broke into the jail, took Walter Manning out of the jail, beat him up pretty severely, but then they lynched him from a lamppost in the street. And it wasn't that he was the only one that had happened to.
Yeah.
But as you said, and as you introduced that story there, is that it was a dangerous thing for anybody to bail out or near the area where not only the bombing had occurred, but also where the civilian populace had control there. It would be better to be captured by one of the military personnel.
And I know it was also on that day you flew the mission that earned you the Distinguished Flying Cross. You downed 3 German fighter planes in that one mission. You were honorably discharged from active duty in 1950. You were 25. You had hundreds of flight hours. You're a decorated war hero. You had helped to defeat the Nazis, and you wanted to be a commercial pilot. Can you briefly tell us what happened when you presented yourself to Pan Am and TWA?
Yes, I was just summarily dismissed as not being qualified by virtue of the fact that I was African American. One of the companies, they said outright that they just weren't accepting black individuals as aircrew members. Which was not true because I had just read, I think the day before, a small advertisement in the paper that they were looking for pilots to train. The other company, I think it was the vice president of personnel, came out and tried to rationalize why they would not accept me, and he used the reasoning or the rationale that the passengers would be extremely upset to see a black man walking down the aisle and getting into the cockpit and taking the plane off. That feeling and situation prevailed, for a couple of years, and then I will say that the airlines relented and they gradually started accepting African Americans as crew members, as pilots, and.
But by then you'd moved on.
I had moved on then,
Yeah.
but bringing it up to today, in every major airline that we have in the country, we have blacks flying in the cockpit there as pilots and co-pilots, also air crew members, your carriers or. Such as UPS and FedEx, they have a large contingent of black crew members. And again, I mentioned bringing tears to my eyes when you were playing Little Coquette, but it brought tears to my eyes when I was taking a trip a couple of years ago and leaving Detroit here, the metro airport, going somewhere, I can't remember where, but anyway, when I entered the plane, I looked into the cockpit there, and there were 2 African-American pilots. One was the co-pilot, and one was the pilot. But not only that, the thing that started bringing the tears to my eyes is they were both female.
Wow. So you can assume the mantle of trailblazer. And we also see in the book amends were made in later years. You were made an honorary pilot by Delta and American Airlines.
That's right.
Also, it was a very, very powerful moment in the book Soaring to Glory, March 2007. The Tuskegee Airmen were presented the Congressional Gold Medal by President George W. Bush, of course, himself the son of a war pilot, and reading about the president saluting all of you is that brought tears to my eyes. But
Yes,
the question, how did that feel to you at that moment?
Well, it was, I can hardly, just awesome. The president, stood back and he was, apologizing for the way the nation had treated its black citizens during the war there. And he says, I even understand that, even you as officers had terrible events where you were not even saluted at times by the white soldiers there. And he says, but I want to make amends as far as that's concerned. And he stood back and drew himself up to full attention and threw up his right arm and saluted the group that was in front of him there.
Speaking of making amends, were you among the many, many black veterans who did not get any of the benefits promised by the GI Bill?
No, I did get all the benefits, so I did not fall in that category, but I certainly think that's, horrifying that there were those men who sacrificed the way that they did, and they did not get their just reward for it.
Yes, and I know you went on to become a mechanical engineer and did very well.
Well, that's right. When I found out that I couldn't meet my dream as far as an airline pilot was concerned, I was running out of time as far as age was concerned. I decided to go to a fallback position, which, anyway, I went to New York University, got my degree in mechanical engineering, and went up the corporate ladder from there. And I found it very gratifying, and I eventually retired as vice president of a oil and gas consortium right in Detroit here.
Colonel Stewart, what are your thoughts and your feelings on the love and the affection and gratitude that's being shown to those of you who have been dubbed the greatest generation?
Well, it's well appreciated because it was sort of a come down at the end of the war, I think. But then a lot of those feelings were resurrected, especially with in the case of the Tuskegee Airmen, there were two movie films that came out. One was an HBO film by the name of the Tuskegee Airmen, and the other was George Lucas film by the name of the Red Tails.
Well, and it's probably worth mentioning that the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum is on Jefferson Avenue in Detroit, right here in Michigan, and it's certainly worth seeing. And I have to say it is very much worth reading the book on your life, Soaring to Glory, a Tuskegee Airman's first-hand account of World War II, written by Philip Handleman, along with my guest, Lieutenant Colonel Harry T. Stewart, Jr. Sir, it has been a pleasure to talk with you and to say from the bottom of everyone's hearts, thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
And that's Stateside for today. I'm Cynthia Canty. Thank you so much for listening.
Tell me why you keep fooling little coquette, making fun of the ones who love you.